So as a day job, some of you may know, others may not, I do graphic design. And part of that, doing graphic design, is learning quite a bit about how to illustrate things and how to make different pictures. But it goes in more than just making drawings and, learning how to draw neat pictures. It goes into a lot of different categories. And one of those categories that you have to learn a lot about is color, because color is very important in graphic design, and you want to have the right types of colors and not the wrong kinds. You want to have the right mixtures and the right tones. You don't want colors to be mixed together that clash, unless you're doing that on purpose, and things like this. But I was thinking about mixing colors, and of course I know all kids are taught to be graphic designers from a small age. Did you know that? So like you kids over there, what happens when you mix blue and red together? You get purple. Purple, yes. You get purple. This was not too hard. This was not to be a trick question, but very simple one, and sometimes it feels like one. But you get purple, right? You mix two different colors and you get a different color, don't you? And that happens also when we, for instance, do yellow and red, we get orange, or blue and yellow, we get green, and those are very simple. So you take two different colors, you put them together, and you get a completely different color. Now, let's talk about whites. When we talk about white, everybody goes, it's white, right?
Not really.
But once you start learning more about graphic design and color and things like this and color theory, you'll see that there are tons of different whites out there. You go to Home Depot or something, to the paint department, and you look, and there's like a whole section that's just called whites. There's a commercial, I actually think it's for Home Depot about paint, that is talking about getting that there's more. It's not just black and white when you're talking about shades of gray. That was a pretty good pun, I thought, right? In color theory. And it has this woman, and she wants the perfect gray, and she's looking at her wall with all the different swatches of different types of grays. Same exact thing. When you look and you see a white, it looks just like it's a white. But when you start throwing it next to other whites, you realize that white is a whole lot of different colors. And over the last couple of years in our house, we've painted a lot of rooms white, even though each of those whites has been a different shade of white. Things such as the amount of sun or the amount of shade, what the colors in that room are going to be, have all played a part in what type of white was going to be in there. So whites all look white until we put them close together. And we see that upon that process that there is a mixing of colors that go into making white. So every single type of white has a little bit of other colors in it. It might be a little dab of brown, a little dab of yellow, maybe a little blue. If you put a little blue into a white, it makes it a cool white. If you put a little yellow in, it makes it a warm white. And I found that the better quality paints oftentimes have more colors in them because it creates a greater amount of depth to that color. So when you look at it, it looks richer than just having a white wall. So when we look at all these different whites, this room has white up here, white on the walls, white tables. We have white in our shirts, the white flag over here, the white on the Israeli flag. Which one would you say is the most pure white, though?
The cleanest.
The cleanest? Maybe the flag, maybe here. I don't know. But at the core, all these are probably not true whites and are actually colors that are mixed. But when we think about our spiritual lives, what does Yehovah want of us? Yehovah desires each of us to be pure white, not a mixture of colors or off-whites. He wants us holy and not muddied by other colors. As we continue in our passage in Luke chapter 19, we will see several commands that continue to connect us to his holiness. Did I say Luke?
Yeah.
I said Luke. Leviticus chapter 19, excuse me. Leviticus chapter 19. It's a good thing I have my wife with me, right? I'd probably forget my head at home or something. There it goes again. Leviticus chapter 19, excuse me, but I get something in my head sometimes it's hard for me to get it out. In our Heavenly Father's love for his people, he sets out several illustrations in this section of Leviticus, as well as in the rest of Leviticus, to continually remind us and encourage us in our walk with him. So let us take a look at some of these today. We'll be down in Leviticus 19, starting in verse 19 today. In there it says, "You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your livestock breed with another kind. You shall not sow your field with mixed seed, nor shall a garment of mixed linen and wool come upon you." So you see here, in this little section of verses, those right there, 3 different things that are mentioned. And what do they all deal with? Mixing, okay? And I know that everybody that has come to Torah eventually hits on these verses and wonders, what in the world are they talking about? And I'm going to hopefully share with you some thoughts, and hopefully that'll help you better understand. Looking through different commentaries and stuff on these verses, one individual came to mind, or I wanted to share. He says, "You shall not sow your field with mixed seed." The mixing of these things, different species of livestock, seeds, and fabrics, was usually seen by ancient pagans to be a source of magical power. God wanted Israel to have no association with these pagan customs. So in this individual's understanding of this section of mixing, it dealt with a connection or a differentiation between God's people and the pagans that they were surrounded by, and also the pagans they were going to go and defeat in the land of Israel. And in what his study has done, and his conclusion is that this mixing has something to do with the way that they worship their gods. And in so doing, God said these things are things you, as the children of Israel, will not do. But I wanted to kind of go on and split each of these sections up, from animals to seed to clothing, and kind of look at each one of these. So keeping that thought process in mind, we go on and just look at the first one there of animals. The animals of different kinds. And it says there that animals of different kinds aren't supposed to be mixed. You're not supposed to mix 2 different kinds of animals together. Now I was studying and researching this some more for this today. And as I looked about, and pretty consistently with a lot of different websites and sources said, if you stick any 2 different kinds of animals together in any type of a corral or anything like that, they will not breed with each other. It's extremely rare that similar kinds will breed together. And that only happens once in a blue moon. Like for instance, one example especially that many of us probably know is a horse and a donkey. On an extremely rare occasion, a horse and a donkey who are corralled together and kept together consistently will breed with each other, naturally. But 99.999% of the time, that doesn't happen. There is another one that a lot of people like are ligers. You may have ever heard of a liger? A lion and a tiger that are mixed together. Well, I was thinking, well, maybe that's something, if they've ever seen any of those in the wild. Never seen in the wild, ever. Only in captivity has that ever happened. Now, they've proven that they can be done, yes, but it's never been something that has any consistency or anything that out in the wild happens. So what do we see in the context of what Yah is saying in these verses? Well, that he has separated out over time these different groups so that they don't breed together. Lions breed with lions, tigers with tigers, zebras with zebras, horses with horses. They don't tend to come together. Even though you have similar, for instance, deer species that live near each other, they don't breed together either. They breed with their similar kinds, even though they can sometimes share habitats. Bulls and various forms of cattle don't tend to breed with each other either. So we see that this is not the norm that is happening. So if something like this was to be happening, it had to be man-made. And God says this is not something you should be doing. Now, mankind says, well, wait a minute. I have something that's better. You know, for instance, if I take a male mule or male donkey and a female horse and I breed them, I get a mule. And a mule has a lot of great capabilities from both of those other species. From the horse, it gets a much bigger size and height ratio and muscle mass than the donkey. But from the donkey, it gets a much better endurance and ability to work than the horse. So it's better, right? Well, unfortunately, when you breed those two together, they cannot give an offspring. And that's just something I didn't know, but the reason for that is that a horse has 64 chromosomes in their DNA, and a donkey only has 62. And so when you breed the two, the one that comes out only has 63, and it messes with the genetics to be able to produce offspring. Now, I think they said that there's been extremely rare cases where the mule, or as the other one is called, is a hinny, which is where you do a male horse with a female donkey, usually not as good of a match, that they have come out with offspring a few times. Why is that? Well, if we understand genetics usually, when you have mutations are not good, they're bad. They're breaking down of God's creation. And so when that happens, when you break something down, it doesn't work properly, does it? Cancer is a mutation. How many people love cancer on their body? Don't know of anybody yet. Why? Because when the cancer comes out, it's mutated cells, and when they come into your body, they begin to eventually take over and destroy good, wholesome, natural cells that you need. People die from cancer when the cancer, what's called metastasizes or expands to a point where it destroys all the good tissue in a certain area of your body, and your body can no longer function as the way it's supposed to. Mutations are not good things. There is no such thing as a mutation that happens that creates something better than what it was before, unlike what modern science typically tries to tell us in the way of evolution. The same thing can be seen in the things with animals, that while we see these things happen, this is a genetic mutation, and it creates a faulty new thing, i.e. a mule that cannot reproduce. And so we see there in this concept of the animals and mixing that God, number one, shows us that mixing of these is not a good thing simply because it will create animals that are not for reproducing. They're mutations. So while they may seem like something better initially, down the road, they're going to begin to create problems if you try to do this continuously. Secondly, mixing your seeds. In mixing the seeds, I have a few other commentaries I want to share. One commentary states, it's possibly seen as an idolatrous practice. This command was to stop people from doing something idolatrous. That fits with a little bit of what the whole section of Leviticus 19 is about, doesn't it? God doesn't want to have his people to do idolatrous practices. He doesn't want them to look at the nations around them and copy what they're doing. So, this individual stated that they seem to think that these were idolatrous practices to mix your seed. But in another instance where I was doing some research on this passage and trying to figure out what the concept of mixing seed was about, it mainly talked about barley and wheat, because those are the two primary crops that are grown throughout the Middle East. We call, barley deals, like we said, with the Aviv and the calendar and things, the first crop that grows in the spring. But barley, if you understand barley, how many of you have ever seen barley out in the field? Out in the field? Not too much. Not usually growing very much around, especially around here. You've probably eaten barley, and we've all had probably beef and barley soup, somewhere along the line, but that's about the extent of what we know of barley, right? Well, the reason for that is because barley is considered a cheap, lower grade crop, and its yield per the same amount of acreage as wheat is much less, and therefore it's a little bit harder to process, so therefore it's not considered as good of a crop. Wheat, on the other hand, is considered and has been considered for millennia as the premier grain crop to grow. Its yield, its nutrition, its ease of getting it and harvesting it and growing it are all ways that are much better than barley. So if that was the case, and you have these two things, the reason, why would you grow barley at all then if you can grow wheat? Well, because barley can be harvested faster. So when you're coming out of winter and all of your crops and all your food stores are getting depleted, then you can come and start raising barley right away and get a quick crop to get back to your food supply again, while you're waiting for the wheat to become ripe later on in the year. Does everybody make sense? Make sense to everybody? So wheat, of course, would be more expensive than barley also. Barley is considered the poor man's food because it's a cheaper crop. But if I was a smart, wealthy merchant with no scruples, what is a way I could make more money with my crops? Could I take some of the more expensive wheat, mix it with some of the cheaper barley, put it together in a bag, and sell it as all wheat? Does anybody ever do that within merchandising and stuff? Does that ever happen in our culture? Do people try to cut things together, one that's worse than the other, and sell it as the better product? Absolutely. So you would have people, number one, if you did this, and some commentators stated that this was something that was done by the pagans around and the merchants around who didn't have any scruples and didn't care about other people, to make more money. So that would be a negative in God's eyes when you were talking about loving your neighbor. The second thing, though, is if you went and you sowed your field with this mixed crop, what's going to happen to your field? You're going to have a mixture of barley and wheat. And of course, the scripture talks a lot about things such as the wheat and the tares, right? And tares are weeds. They're grasses that don't really produce anything. But when you have your wheat and your tares mixed together, is it a good thing? No, because it's very difficult to get the good crop out of the bad crop. The same thing would be the case if you mixed barley and wheat. And so not only would someone mixing these things cause a negative effect in that they would be robbing someone of money, but the second part of it would be that they would be ruining that year's harvest for the people that bought this. Neither of those things, of course, goes in line with Yah's desire in this chapter to have you love your neighbor as yourself. So then it comes to a different question that I oftentimes get asked is, can you plant various fruits and vegetables together in your garden? Anybody ever asked that question? I think it was asked last week by someone. Can you plant fruits and vegetables together in your garden, or is that considered mixing your seeds? The answer to this question is yes, you can mix the fruits and vegetables in your garden. This is not speaking of mixing plants or putting one type of plant near another. the benefits of doing these kind of things has been found over and over again to be incredible. There's a situation, we were talking about this week, called the Three Sisters, that was found and discovered by Indians living in North America many centuries ago, where basically you put a corn seed in, and then you plant beans around the base of it, and on the outside of the beans you plant squash seeds. And the corn grows up and creates a trellis that the beans can grow up and be able to expand the vine that they like to do as they climb up the corn stalk. Usually you get the corn with its normal stalk. The beans produce nitrogen and plant nitrogen in the ground, which the corn requires in order to grow healthy. So there's a benefit. And then the squash around the outside provides shade for the base of the plants, the beans and the corn, which allows them to stay healthier and keep their water retention better on the soil. And so therefore, it's a win-win-win all the way around. And everything grows healthier. Okay? Now, none of those things will mix with the other. Squash cannot mix with beans. Beans cannot mix with corn. None of it can come together. So when you're putting these plants near each other, you don't have a worry about a mixing of the seeds, which is what the understanding of the passage is a mixing of seeds. But we need to obviously be careful to not put similar kinds too close together, because you can get bad fruit. I was talking with Deb this week about my garden, and I told her that I had the opportunity to spend some time out there, and we planted squash and zucchini and cucumbers next to each other. And she was like, and I didn't know how far. I was like, well, I put them in different sections, and she's like, no, you need to put these like at least 10 feet away from each other. So I'm a little worried. We did this once before on accident a long time ago when we first started gardening, and so I knew you weren't supposed to be near each other, but wasn't sure if they would be. Like that was I think a spaghetti, butternut squash and a zucchini plant where we planted each other nearby. And we got these weird fruit, vegetable things out. And we're like, oh, that's cool, we can still eat that. They're big fruits. So we cut them open, we start eating. They tasted like earwax. I'm not joking. Every single one of them tasted like earwax. And I don't know about you, but I don't enjoy a meal of earwax. So I learned very quickly that was not something you wanted to do, was have your like kinds come together where they will mix in the fruits that they produce. So I suggest not doing that. It's very similar, if we could say, to the donkey and the horse kind of idea. Can they produce something? Yes, but you probably aren't going to like the results necessarily that come out of it. So we see here that this command is about mixing seed. Doing this was either used by others to worship their false gods, or it was a way to defraud and therefore hate your neighbor. Either way, it was a violation of Yah's desire for his people. So we have not mixing animals, not mixing seed. That leads us to the third part of this, mixing your clothing. If you look back there, it says, nor shall a garment of mixed linen and wool come upon you. It's kind of a confusing statement there, isn't it? In my mind, when I read that statement, what comes out to me is you're not supposed to put a garment where you weave together wool and linen. You're not supposed to mix the two. So I've done a lot of research over the years on this thing, and when I have a chance and go through this passage, I strive to remember the things that I've learned. If you go to Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 11, you don't have to go there. I'm just going to read it real fast. It's this companion passage to this. It says, you shall not wear a garment of different kinds of wool and linen together. Does that clear anything up? Not particularly. At least not in my mind. Maybe in your mind, you're like, oh, yeah, I got it now. I totally understand that. But in my mind, it didn't really clarify. And in looking through at different people's understanding of this, you still get the same idea that there's a lot of variety here. So one commentator put it this way. I'm going to read that what they state. It's a little wordy, but hopefully you'll understand. Although this precept, like the other two with which it is associated, was in all probability designed to root out some superstition, it seemed, meaning i.e. idolatry, it seems to have had a further meaning. The law, it is to be observed, did not prohibit the Israelites wearing many different kinds of clothes together, but only the two specified. And the observations and researches of modern science have proved that wool, when combined with linen, increases its power of passing off the electricity from the body. In hot climates, it brings on malignant fevers and exhausts the strength, and when passing off from the body, it meets with the heated air, inflames, and excoriates like a blister. This is from someone who wrote about this a couple hundred years ago. So we see there's the explanation of this, is that when you mix these two, you weave them together, it creates this fabric that is not healthy for the human body and creates a lot of problems, health-wise. Another way that someone interpreted it from their research was that wool and linen together actually makes a weaker fabric that tears more easily. So when you put the two different types of fabric together, the weave of those two threads are obviously different. And so when you put them together, the strength ratio is different. And as it wears, it will begin to stretch improperly, and things will begin to rip and break more easily. So it creates an inferior fabric. And when you think of something that is inferior fabric-wise, especially in scriptural times, not in our modern way of looking at clothes, a person might have one, maybe two sets of garments that they would have at any given time. Remember when Joseph had his brothers come and he gave all of them gifts, it said that one of the gifts he gave to all of his brothers was a set of clothing. And to his brother Benjamin, forgive me if this is off the top of my head, it was either 5 or 10 sets. And so it was five sets, which was like, wow, this dude's rich. Okay, now how many of you have more than 5 sets of clothing in your home? I know people, I remember back in my day, and some of you that are my age and older will remember Imelda Marcos, the wife of the president of Philippines, who had over 1,000 pairs of shoes and was considered ungodly wealthy because of that compared to the poorness of her country. But yes, we do not understand the concept of only having one pair of clothing to wear, one set outfit to wear. So if you were to do something like weave together these type of fibers together, and it created a weaker, cheaper cloth that would rip, and you sold it to your brother as something of a higher quality, what are you doing to them? Cheating them. Are you loving your neighbor as yourself? So we can see definitely something in this concept of this, with the way that this person had researched, that this would be an issue. The other one that is researched and talked about was the fact that comparing the normal person's clothing to the priestly garments of the high priest. The high priest's undergarments were made out of linen, but their outer tunic that was full of color was made out of wool. And so you had a wool garment that was worn over the top of the linen garments. And Yah says this is very specifically the clothing that the high priest himself is going to wear. And so there was a lot of commentators that had a view that this was something that was to make the high priest stand out among all the people. Therefore, the rest of the people were not to wear the same thing as the high priest. And so this concept of mixing wool and linen was a way to separate the high priest from everyone else. So these were the 3 interpretations that were given as to why this idea of mixing wool and linen was an issue with Yah and his commands. So I want to bring this, how does this work into our modern clothing? I get a lot of comments. I make t-shirts, and all the t-shirts that I make are all half cotton, half something else. Rayon, polyester, nylon, you name it. And it's very difficult to find a t-shirt that is like 100% something. Everybody was wanting to, the Torah sisters was wanting to buy these, or not everybody, but some, and they're like, well, do you have any that are 100% cotton? We're like, sorry, you can't get it. And they're like, oh, well, I can't buy it. So the viewpoint of a lot of people was, if it's not 100% of something, therefore I cannot purchase it. It's not for me. Is that what this is talking about in this concept of wool and linen? Is it that there's more than one fiber of clothing, then I cannot wear it? Another thought process you could have is this a mixing of an animal and a plant fiber? And therefore, if you are not to mix an animal and a plant fiber, i.e. wool is an animal fiber and linen is a plant, so therefore don't mix those. Or is this something that is dealing only with a prohibition against linen and wool? Because those are the only two things that are mentioned. However, even at the time that the Torah was written, there were more things that were used to make clothing than just wool and linen at this point in time. And so, if we think of it as that last thing where it's prohibitive of only wool and linen, then it had to be one of those two things or nothing at all. Then you would be, why wouldn't Yah mention the other types of fabrics that could be used to make these things? That is the question there. In looking and studying this myself throughout Scripture, I look and see that probably it's a thing of mainly of linen and wool. At second most would be mixing of a animal fiber with a plant fiber, because it would not be strong, it would not create a right mixture together. All right? So when you think about like rayon, nylon, those kind of things that we have today, spandex and so on and so forth, where do those things come from?
Petroleum.
They come from petroleum. All right? They're, gas products. Where do gas products come from?
Ground.
They come from the ground, but they are not naturally, they're not a thing. They're not a mineral or a vitamin or something like that. Where did they come from originally? Anybody?
Plant or not?
Yes, you're right. They originally came from plants. All your petroleum-based stuff, gas, natural gas, coal, etc., are all byproducts from deterioration of plants. So during the flood, when all the things were uplifted and mixed in together, and I was just watching some stuff yesterday and today on this actually, from a group called Is Genesis History, and they were talking about how they've now can see in the coal deposits the bark, if you put it under a microscope, still left in the coal deposits. And they can still see the parts of the plant fibers still in the coal deposits to this day. So when you pull coal out, what you're pulling out is compressed plants, typically logs that were deteriorated during the flood, that soaked full of water, dropped down, and then as other silt and soot were put on top of them, it created the proper amount of pressure that created coal. Same thing goes with oil. Oil is also a product of the deterioration of plant matter. And so if you look at, if it's the thing of wool or linen or plant and animal, then just make sure that you always have either all plant fibers or all animal fibers in your cloth, if you want to do it that way. And so your rayons, your nylons, your polyesters, etc., are all made from plants, in essence. So I hope that helps a little bit in understanding those things. They're still tricky. Flawless, no, God didn't say this is why you do it, per se. But we can look at context, and the context in that actually passage and in the scripture as a whole, and we can get some very key things to learn from. In one commentary in speaking of this says, man is not to confuse what Yah has made distinct. Man is not to confuse what Yah has made distinct. Although this precept for the mixing of wool and linen in here may be difficult, like the other two with which it is associated, it was in all probability designed to root out some superstition. It seems to have had a further meaning also, though. The law, it is to be observed, did not prohibit the Israelites wearing many different kinds of clothing together, but only the two specified. And the observations and researches of modern science have proven that wool, when combined with linen, increases its power of passing off the electricity from the body. In hot climates, it brings on malignant fevers and exhausts the strength and then passes off from the body. Excuse me, I read that again and copied it twice in my notes from two different sources. So that was something there. Another commentator says, as what God has joined, we must not separate. So what he has separated, we must not join. The sowing of mingled corn or mingled grain and the wearing of linsey woolsey, which is an older term of mixing a garment mixed with those two, are forbidden, either as superstitious customs of the heathen or to intimate how careful they should be not to mingle themselves with the heathen, nor to weave any of the usages of the Gentiles into God's ordinances. So what is being stated there in that commentary is that these definitely have a visible illustration for us. When I started out, I was talking about the white paint. There's lots of different whites. Can you tell what the differences in those white paints by themselves? The answer is typically no. It's only when you bring other whites together that you can see there's other colors mixed in. And it's so easy for us to sit there and allow a little bit of color into our lives from the world. And we still look white. We may even look at ourselves in the mirror and still say, hey, I'm still white. I'm still pure white. Look at me. But then we put ourselves up to the white of YHVH and what he desires from us. And all of a sudden we see how the world is beginning to corrupt us in our own lives. We definitely can see something of this idea of mixing like this in a connection with our modern gender confusion and how sin has corrupted what Yah made. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 27, it says, a male and a female, he created them. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? Then how is it that we've got to the point now where some people say we have upwards of 60 different genders in our culture? And scientists, I've seen articles at least 12. Where is this coming from? It comes from mixing with the heathen and seeing what the world has done and embracing it. And now we see even in our own and among the body of Messiah that this stuff is beginning to creep in and destroy God's people. This is just one example. Ultimately, YHVH is a God of separation. He is holy. Which again, everybody, what does holy mean? Set apart, all right? So he is a God of separation, isn't he? He doesn't just go in among everything and accept everything, does he? He is not one to desire mixing with the world. One commentary said, God is a God of separation, and in these physical examples, he was teaching his people to separate themselves from sin and defilement. I would love to come up here and say this is exactly what God was speaking of in his Torah. And I wish I could do that. But as you can tell, lots of people from lots of different time frames have studied and researched this and come up with multiple different viewpoints, haven't they, on what these are meaning. What I can tell you, if you want to not mix and only wear either linen or wool, be my guest. I do not think they have some special superpower to heal you, though, as some are saying these days, too. They're just there because they're good quality cloth, and some are nicer in some areas. I wouldn't want to wear linen much in the north, and I wouldn't want to wear wool much in the south. That's a very good thing to understand. Linen is great if you're in the tropics. Wool is great if you live in Michigan. All right? But if you try to wear linen in Michigan, you're going to have an awfully cold time of it. And if you wear wool in the Caribbean or in Florida, you're going to have a pretty hard time of it. All right? So we need to use wisdom as God's people, ultimately. An understanding of who God is and what he's saying in this. Ultimately, in this context of the scripture passage, and as we go on Leviticus 19, he says, love Yehovah with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. If we are loving him, then we are wanting to do as he commands. We're not looking to the world to see what they're doing. We're not looking towards man-made traditions or witchcraft or any sort of gobbledygook that's out there that's going to create an idolatrous situation for us. But we also want to keep and love our neighbors ourselves. So in the practices of mixing things, we should stay away from if those things are going to cause animosity between us and our brothers. So do I wear mixed clothing? The answer is yes. I don't think I've found any non-mixed clothing, especially none that I can afford. I don't have non-mixed bedding on my bed. Well, actually, I just got all cotton, 100% cotton for like the first time in forever. So I have 100% cotton bedding now. That was the first time in a long time, you know. But cotton isn't even mentioned in the scriptures. Did you know that? There's no such thing as cotton in this. So maybe we shouldn't be, if we take this to the nth degree, maybe we shouldn't even be having cotton. So you understand how this can be over-exaggerated to something if we aren't careful. I do not think that God was saying only linen or only wool, that's all you get. But he's saying, do not mix things if it's going to cause you to stumble with me, or if it's going to cause you to stumble with your brother. And so we can learn from these verses, that verse there, this important lesson that Yah was trying to teach his people. Didn't get as far as I was planning to get today, but there was a lot. Hopefully that helps. Does anybody have any questions? Because I know that those have a lot of questions. I tried to answer ones that I've heard asked before. Does anybody have any other questions I didn't answer that you would like to ask? All right. I'm still here if you wanted to ask me afterwards, and I'll be glad to talk and discuss that with you. But let's have Shabbat Shalom, and is going to come and share with us in music.